On paper, the UFC Championship shouldn't be defended against the number 10 contender, but at the highest level, a ranking is often just a number on a screen. Alexandre Pantoja was just a -185 favorite for his flyweight title defense against Steve Erceg, and that proved to be more than reasonable, as this fight could have gone either way. Everyone was really impressed by the inexperienced Erceg, who ran off 11 wins in a row after losing his second fight, capturing the Eternal MMA Flyweight Championship, then winning his first 3 UFC fights with an impressive second-round knockout of a ranked opponent, Matt Schnell, already earning him this surprise title challenge. Erceg was the better boxer here, showing more technique and footwork. This was a massive step up in competition though, especially in the grappling department, where Erceg is used to winning the scrambles, but here he was consistently outmaneuvered, losing virtually every transition. Pantoja's strategy is to make it a dogfight. He constantly pressures, creating chaos in stand-up by charging in and utilizing a lot of body punches and overhands to help disguise his real purpose, which is to drop down or lock up and trip for the takedown. Pantoja isn't a great technical striker, but he was landing more when he was blitzing than Erceg was, and usually made up for his lack of perfect technique through his pace and the diversity of his attack. Even though you know what he wants to do, he does enough different things to disguise his moment-to-moment intentions, mixing speeds and quadrants, so it's difficult to predict where he'll be and time him for the counter. Erceg made a good adjustment incorporating elbows to slow Pantoja down, but Pantoja was clearly the faster reactor and more creative fighter, especially on the ground. Constant pressure doesn't necessarily score, but Pantoja was landing at least a shot on all his blitzes, and often getting a takedown. He had a personal best 9 takedowns in this fight, though that's partially because Erceg refused to accept the takedown, doing a nice job of keeping a hip off the canvas, and creating scrambles even if he lost a lot of them. Erceg's supporters claimed lay and pray because Pantoja wasn't able to attempt submissions or land much on the ground, but the level of grappling here was excellent, and I was always entertained by these portions because there was almost constant movement from both, with a lot of position changes and escapes. It's not that Pantoja wasn't trying. He kept transitioning into positions that would have led to offense had Erceg not been so good defensively. Both were constantly moving to try to stay ahead of one another, which didn't leave Pantoja many chances to punch, but Pantoja was always threatening, and forcing Erceg to keep working hard. Control may not be as big a deal as it used to be scoring-wise, but the fact that Pantoja was passing guard or forcing Erceg to surrender his back certainly should be scored as effective grappling, and was as much a reason this was a very good fight as the stand-up portions were. For me, there were really 3 fights here. The early portion was dominated by Pantoja's blitzes and takedowns, while Erceg tried to figure out how to deal with his explosive athleticism and relentless pressure. The middle was dominated by Erceg after he cut Pantoja with a big elbow. Pantoja realized the elbows were landing when he initiated inside work, making him hesitate to do the things he relies upon to get the fight into his domain, which meant Erceg was finally given time and space to fight behind his jab and allow his superior technical striking to carry the rounds. The final portion saw Erceg, convinced by his corner that he needed the finish rather than to simply win the final round, try to utilize the losing strategy of grappling with ground ace Pantoja. A chin seemingly made of granite allowed Pantoja to walk through all of Erceg's best shots, leaving Erceg convinced that he had a better chance of submitting Pantoja from the top than of knocking him out, especially since Pantoja was no longer charging into danger. Erceg has 6 submission wins compared to just 2 knockouts, so it wasn't unreasonable for him to think he's more of a submission finisher. It's just problematic to try to implement that against the best grappler in the division. In round 1, Erceg was cut by an accidental clash of heads, then taken down 3 minutes in. Erceg's defensive grappling allowed him to get back to his feet pretty quickly, a theme we saw throughout, but likewise Pantoja was still able to take a dominant position, and would just take Erceg right back down. The only round where Pantoja had less than 1 minute 25 seconds of ground control was the 4th, because he didn't manage a single takedown. We can point to Erceg's decision-making in the 5th round as the reason he lost, but I'd suggest that it wouldn't have mattered if Erceg was a lot more proactive early in the fight. His jab and teep could keep Pantoja at bay, and basically all of Pantoja's stand-up offense other than the low kick is derived from making things unconventional through the rush. Even though Pantoja comes off as a bit of a wild man, there's definitely a lot of method to his madness, and the more Erceg waited, the more Pantoja made him defend strikes until the takedown was available. Erceg swept midway through the 2nd, but Pantoja stood right up, which even at this point I was thinking wasn't the worst thing for Erceg given the difference in their grappling skills. Erceg began to come on in the second half of round 2, doing a better job of backpedaling away from Pantoja's rushes and answering on the move. He was very accurate and landed a solid shot here and there. One of the key series of the fight saw Erceg land a big elbow followed by a left hook. Still, it just felt like Erceg was easily outworked in this round, as Pantoja's constant pressure had Erceg on the defensive for the majority of the round. Erceg countered a low kick with an elbow to start the third, and this was really where the fight turned in my opinion because it made Pantoja begin to hesitate. Now that Pantoja was straying from his winning strategy of making things messy, staying on the outside or backing, Erceg was feeling much less pressure, and was more confident about putting his jab out. Erceg was still way too hesitant, even though Pantoja was now giving him the chance to hit him. Pantoja wasn't answering the jab, Pantoja was answering the inactivity, but the way Erceg was fighting made you believe he felt the opposite. Erceg should have made a more concerted effort to establish himself here. After a thumb to the eye, Pantoja was cut by a right elbow and nailed with a left hook 3.5 minutes in. Unfortunately for Erceg, Pantoja essentially proceeded as though he was totally unfazed, immediately hitting a double leg takedown. Pantoja did feel his head to assess the damage while working for a second takedown against the cage, but that didn't stop him from dragging Erceg down again and taking his back momentarily. Without any bigger consistent offense from Pantoja, this round should go to Erceg for the damaging elbow. Both corners nonetheless told their fighters that Pantoja was up 3 rounds to 0, which seemed very bizarre since rounds 2 and 3 could easily have gone either way. It's difficult to comprehend why Erceg's corner didn't tell him he won at least one of these rounds, unless they believe the hometown judges will score any non-dominant round for the Brazilian. Pantoja was very shaken by his forehead painting both fighters Jackson Pollock style, and didn't seem right the entire 4th round, which he basically took off. Erceg was now able to fight the way he wanted to without much resistance, stalking Pantoja the entire round. This was a very commanding boxing round for Erceg, fighting behind his jab and picking Pantoja apart. Pantoja is an offensive fighter who fought entirely defensively, which again could partially be explained by the idea that he believed he just needed to survive the last 2 rounds. Erceg surprisingly took Pantoja down early in the 5th, but as Cody Stammen put it, shooting on Pantoja is like taking yourself down. Pantoja gained control as soon as Erceg tried to pass, which was a huge confidence boost after a terrible 4th round, where in a fight he had 19 total takedown attempts in, only one of those came in the 4th. Given Pantoja had almost entirely abandoned the blitzes he built the early lead on, Erceg really had to make Pantoja prove he was still willing to risk putting himself out there. If not, Erceg would easily coast to another boxing-dominated round. Pantoja would seemingly have to charge sooner or later, and that's where Erceg would have the chance to land another big elbow, or some other counter that might lead to the finish. Again, it came down to what the corners were telling their fighters, as Erceg could definitely have won this round by walking Pantoja down if Pantoja continued fighting the way he did in round 4, except that would theoretically have meant Erceg still lost 48-47. No one has been able to crack Pantoja's amazing chin during his 17-year career, and nothing Erceg hit Pantoja with appeared to be about to change that, so Erceg probably thought he had a better chance of utilizing his top game to get a submission win. Of course, no one has tapped Pantoja either, and Erceg hadn't made any progress in the grappling exchanges, although most of them saw him starting on his back foot so to speak because they were initiated by Pantoja. Erceg clearly grabbed the fence to avoid a takedown that would have been key. The 5th round was close, but I had Erceg ahead because he opened up another cut outside of Pantoja's right eye. With a minute and a half left, Erceg shot again, but Pantoja Granby rolled into a knee bar that he quickly abandoned to take control. Pantoja briefly mounted and landed a handful of strikes to close out the fight. Controlling for the last minute and a half after Erceg's unnecessary gamble was ultimately enough to win Pantoja both the round and a very close fight. Erceg gave an excellent performance, and not just for a relatively inexperienced fighter. This might be the most anyone moves up the rankings following a loss, because Erceg convinced even most of the people who scored the fight for Pantoja that he was already skilled enough to win the title today. He just needs to be bolder and more urgent about getting his strikes in, as he did a great job of neutralizing Pantoja on the ground, but had a hard time turning that or his stand-up advantages into any sort of consistent offense. Pantoja made less mistakes, showing more heart, toughness, and fight IQ. Pantoja has this weird body language that sometimes makes him at least appear to be hurt and or tired, but ultimately has this unyielding willpower that allows him to gut these big fights out one way or another. You could see Erceg's frustration with his corner when he heard 2 48-47 scorecards for Pantoja, signaling one to them upon realizing he just needed the final round rather than the finish. The 49-46 Pantoja scorecard from Dave Torelli was egregious, but basically rounds 1 and 5 were obvious for Pantoja, while round 4 was obvious for Erceg. So it comes down to whether Pantoja did enough in either round 2 or 3 to earn the decision. I'm in the minority in thinking Pantoja won the second where he continued to execute his game plan, rather than the third where Erceg was the one dictating, but Pantoja had 3 takedowns in each of these rounds. Even though only one judge, former fighter Fabio Alves, was actually Brazilian, it's hard to imagine Erceg taking both of these rounds from the champion even if the fans weren't behind Pantoja, and it wasn't in a country that prefers grappling. Overall, Pantoja had 125 significant strikes to 111, with 9 takedowns to 1, and 8 minutes 15 seconds of control time to 32 seconds. This was a very good engrossing fight, and it was a shabby move on UFC's part to deny these guys a bonus. There may not have been tons of big obvious highlights, but they kept a crazy pace, showing a high level of skill in all areas throughout a dramatic artistic contest with very small margins. I'm sure everyone would like to see a rematch, except for maybe Pantoja.